Hey, thanks for stopping by, and welcome to the Bayou Root House podcast, where together we're going to explore the mysteries of the unseen, dive into the deep end of folk traditions, and uncover the magic of our seemingly ordinary world. My name is Matt, and I'll be your guide as we journey beyond the veil of the mundane and into the realm of magic and of spirit. Whether you're a seasoned practitioner or you're just starting out on your spiritual path, this podcast is for all those who seek to learn more about the mystical and the magical. From communicating with spirits to working with plants, we have something for just about everyone here. Now, I want this podcast to serve as a sort of classroom, a place of spiritual education, if you will, and as such, all are welcome in its halls. Having said all of that, I'm glad that you decided to join us for our very first episode, and it is my hope that over time this podcast will end up benefiting you and your magical practices in some way. In this first episode, we're going to discuss what this show is all about. I'll give you a little bit of background information about myself, and then I'm going to introduce you to the rich and often interesting world of Southern folk magic. Toward the end of the episode, we're just going to take things back to basics with a quick exploration of a foundational practice that, in my opinion, anyone just starting out should really begin with: ancestral veneration. So grab your cup of coffee, light that candle, and let's talk about some folk magic. Now, I really want to start each of these episodes off the right way, with a blessing. So, before we just jump into the discussion, let's pray. I implore God, the ancestors, and all spirits of light to bless and protect this space, these words, and all who are listening. May God's grace be a lamp unto our feet, and may the wisdom of those who came before be always on our breath. We ask that our journey be clear of confusion, the roads of understanding be open, and divine knowledge find its way into our hearts and minds. So it is, and so it shall be. Amen. To begin, let me tell you a little bit about how all of this even got started. So I had created somewhat of an online presence known as Past the Veil way back in 2010. I say that now, and yes, it sounds like forever ago, but it actually all started with a blog on Blogspot. Over time, that small blog quickly grew into a YouTube channel, and then later on, into a full website. For a while, I co-hosted a podcast with another respected traditional Southern root worker, and at one point I shared a blog with a well-known curandera here in Texas. From my website, I hosted classes on Southern folk magic, I offered spiritual readings, I published a lot of blog posts, and I even made a lot of close friends in the process. At one point, I even wrote a book on playing card divination. It was a very short read, and yep, it totally flopped, but I still completed it, and I think that's all that matters. Around 2014, don't quote me on the year, but several years ago, the broader online magical community seemed to have some sort of inner conflicts happening almost daily. Eventually, people started throwing roots and curses at each other, people in general, and well-known figures in this arena, some of which who are still around today. It was pretty bad, it was really chaotic, and all around kind of childish. But the past is the past, as they say. However, due to all of that, I decided that maybe it was time to go ahead and firstly cleanse myself, and then take a step back from it all. Let the online side of things get through its growing pains. In the meantime, I would just focus on my local clients, my career outside of the spiritual arena, and raising my growing family. So I shut down all of my courses, I stopped offering any kind of spiritual services online, and slowly but eventually I shut down my website. I did, however, leave up my YouTube channel. There was and still is daily activity on some of the more informative videos I had made in that time. Videos like my How to Work with Saint Expedite, for instance. I decided it was best to just keep the channel open for anyone who used those videos for reference in their own spiritual work. And as a plus to that, if I ever did feel the need to come back to the online side of things, it would probably make getting information out there again a little bit easier. And I'm glad I left the channel up, because fast forward all these years, and now I feel called to come back to the online side of things. But you may also be wondering what exactly makes me qualified to discuss these topics in detail, let alone try and teach them to you. Well, for starters, if we're talking about Southern folk magic specifically, my family's history is Southern through and through. I spent the majority of my youth bouncing between rural Texas and rural Louisiana. Needless to say, a large chunk of my youth was also spent absorbing a weird mix of Southern Baptist Christianity that had been blended with lots and lots of old wives' tales, various natural folk remedies, prayers for pretty much any situation you can think of, and various other Southern traditions that I would see my Grammy do, but she never really called them anything specific. In fact, to her, these weren't even magical in any kind of way, and there was usually a very staunch religious undertone to the things that she was doing. In my youth, it just all seemed like weird little quirks, but it was never anything too unusual. Maybe it was how she would gift items to people in a certain way, or she'd pray over an injury to heal it faster, things like that. In fact, I still remember when I moved into my very first apartment. I was probably 17 or 18 at the time, and my Grammy gifted me a set of knives. Now, in that box of knives, there was a penny, a nickel, a dime, and a quarter. When I asked her about the coins, I was told that the coins are given because you're gifting something sharp, and that the coins would prevent the blades from severing the relationship between you and the person that you gift them to. Now, the person who receives the knives is then supposed to give the coins back to the person who gifted them the knives as a way to show that they were purchasing them to prevent any bad blood between the two. Just odd little things, but all sorts of it. Now, aside from my upbringing, I am also an Aborisha and a member of a well-respected Ile in the Houston area for the last 14 or 15-ish years now. My lineage is La Rama de la Pimienta. I have my Eleques, my warriors, and my Mano de Arula. And my godparents' house is also where I was introduced to and fell in love with the absolutely beautiful system of Espiritismo Cruzado. And it was that introduction that led me to finding myself consistently working on unraveling and developing my skills as a spiritual medium. I'm also an initiate of a couple of magical fraternities, and of course throughout my life, I've had the pleasure of meeting, learning from, and working alongside some of the best root workers around, hands down. This podcast is focused primarily on Southern folk magic and conjure work, but I'm listing all these other systems here just to kind of help paint a fuller picture of what I've personally been involved in or otherwise exposed to over the years, because it's this mix that ultimately informs and even in some ways creates my own style of spiritual and magical work and how I understand these things. These have been some of the more formative practices in my life, and they've blessed me tremendously and routinely. I don't seek after titles. This ain't Pokemon. We ain't got to catch them all. But it is a good idea to stay spiritually hungry, and I like to keep my big old belly full. So I'm 40 years old now, and I've been involved in the esoteric, spiritual, and magical community in some way, shape, or form since I was roughly 9 or 10 years old. I've been practicing magic and various spiritual systems for around 3 decades. I would say that I absolutely do not know everything that there is to know, and I am always eagerly learning new things and challenging beliefs that I once held when I do learn something new. It's been and will continue to be a really interesting journey with an ever-changing landscape to take in. But I've been around all of this long enough now that I would say I'm qualified to teach and discuss these topics in depth. As a whole, I've been steeped in 30 years of spiritual, esoteric, and magico-religious practices. Sure, there are plenty of others who have more years on me, but I'm far from being new to any of this, and I like to consider myself fairly well-rounded. Now let's talk about Southern folk magic. What is it exactly? Southern folk magic is a deeply rooted practice that's evolved in the southern United States. It draws its beliefs and mechanisms from a beautiful tapestry of cultures, including primarily African, indigenous, and some European influences. It's a practical and results-oriented system of magic at its core. It's magic for the common people. In Southern folk magic, you'll find things like candle work, prayers and small spiritual workings for all sorts of situations, the petitioning of saints, various herbal remedies and baths to heal pretty much whatever ails you, charm crafting, divination, and so forth. With folk magic, you can heal as well as curse. You can increase as well as decrease, and you can attract as well as push away. Folk magic is just that, though. It's a form of magic. It is not a religion, and without the moral and dogmatic constraints of religious rules, you'll often find that quite a lot of folk magic practitioners actually consider themselves as, quote, working with both hands. Now, what this means is that they can and will curse just as much as they can heal, so long as they believe that it's justified in the eyes of God and their spirits. And sure, if it's an unjustified working and they still perform it, it may come back to bite them somehow. However, my main point here is that generally, there's no concept of like karma as we traditionally understand it that plays a large role in most Southern folk magic traditions. Southern folk magic is not about elaborate rituals, but about using what you have, where you are, to effect change in your life and the immediate world around you. Above all, it's grounded in a connection to the spirits and a connection to the land. Now, it gets even more interesting when you consider that there are many different flavors or types of folk magic in the United States. In the South alone, I can name probably a handful of popular systems, with maybe 3 or 4 of them being the most widely practiced. But what I'm primarily focused on is simply Southern folk magic in general. Yes, you can call it conjure, root work, or even hoodoo if you like, and technically it would tick all those boxes. But keep in mind that all of those do actually mean fairly specific things, and we'll probably go over that in another episode. So these titles, they can be fairly messy due to the fact that most folk practices have historically borrowed elements from other practices near them. So really what you end up with is a lot of overlap between traditions. It can be kind of hard to see where the hard line is. Now, there's also one other much larger conversation that I'm going to leave for other folks to debate over because it always tends to get very heated and messy, and that's the topic of appropriation. I'll just say that whatever traditions you practice, please, please, please study them. And I don't mean just study the tradition itself. I mean really dig in and attempt to understand the origins and the very real blood, sweat, and tears that are written into the origin story of these practices. But I digress. That is a topic for a different episode. For now, I will simply refer to what I do as Southern Conjure. All right, now for the fun stuff. So what I'm about to go over next is probably the one single practice that I personally believe every spiritual worker really needs to begin with when they first start out on their path. And that is, of course, the practice of ancestral veneration. So I used to host this mentorship program a few times every year, and I would take on a handful of students who were just starting to learn a little bit of folk magic. I would tailor this program to meet each student where they were at that time and where they wanted to be in the future. However, one thing never changed. I would always have them begin their journey by learning about their own ancestry. This seems simple, and logistics aside, it usually is, but it's also wildly impactful in every way. There are many reasons why I would have them begin this way. So for starters, if it were not for your ancestors, you wouldn't even be here today. As my godmother likes to say, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. It was their many sacrifices and experiences that ultimately paved the way for you to even come into existence. By honoring this and seeking to show respect for that gift of life, you begin to build a relationship with the spirits of your ancestors who walk with you every day. Your blood is their blood, and from a spiritual point of view, this also means that your ancestors are the closest spirits to you, and therefore the easiest and generally safest spirits to make contact with early on in your practice. They are your very first point of access to the world of spirit. And as such, they also act as your first line of spiritual defense. This access and protection, they're fundamental to practicing magic or any kind of spiritual work efficiently and safely. Aside from simply gaining access to the realm of the dead, working with your ancestors can also often resolve issues and blockages that might be happening in your life. And this is because spirits will sometimes close things off to a person or otherwise present them with challenges in order to force them to go a specific direction. It's usually for their growth, but this is not to mention that there are also troublesome spirits out there who may need elevation or other types of work to stop causing you problems. So by learning how to communicate and work with your ancestors, you're a little bit better equipped to deal with these things more actively. I guess I should also pause here and say that my personal way of working with spirits and how I teach this subject is highly, highly influenced by my experiences in Spiritism, namely Espiritismo Cruzado. I find that Espiritismo, or really any flavor of Spiritism for that matter, provides probably one of the very best frameworks for working with spirits, and it just complements Southern folk magic really well. So in general, yes, folk magic practitioners often do work with their ancestors, spirits of the land, spirits of plants, animals, and so on. But there really isn't a standard way of doing this that just everyone follows. However, there are some fairly universal understandings that most practitioners do observe to some degree and integrate into their own practice. Every person alive today has spirits who walk with them. In fact, everyone, including you, has many spirits walking with them at any given time. And it's more than just the spirits of your ancestors. As a whole, this entire collection of spirits is often referred to in Espiritismo as your spiritual frame or your cuadro espiritual. You can think of this as a literal picture frame if you want. Within that frame is a tapestry of spirits. Each of those spirits contribute to the larger picture. And it's not just spirits that your spiritual frame consists of, but I don't want to steer us into a deep conversation on Spiritism just yet. But this specific concept of the spiritual frame is nonetheless extremely beneficial to the broader conversation that we might just have to cover it in a future episode. Ultimately, building a strong relationship with these spirits, and especially the spirits of your ancestors, is without a doubt one of the most rewarding and most impactful things that you can do for yourself. And this is especially true if you practice any kind of magic or do any kind of spiritual work. And the truth is that it's not even really a hard thing to begin doing. In fact, it requires little more than a few minutes of prayer, a candle, and a glass of water. Yeah, it can get more complex than that, but by default, you don't need much to begin letting your ancestors know that you haven't forgotten about them and that you wish to begin communicating with them. When you give your spirits light, prayer, and water, what you're actually doing is lifting them up, and you're helping them progress in the spiritual realm. Of course, I would be amiss if I didn't tell you that this should be something that you do from a place of love for them and not just a situation of, if I give you this, I want this other thing to happen, right? Ancestral veneration doesn't really work that way. Venerating your spirits is not some kind of magic spell or ritual that you do just when you need something. As I've said before, it's a relationship that you're building that you then strengthen through really simple acts of daily devotion. The most important things required in this equation are actually just your presence and your attention. Your dead walk with you throughout your life. They can give you insights and even provide you with guidance and a direction to follow whenever you may need it. However, they are not miracle vending machines, and not all of them will even pay you much mind, if at all. The ones that do, though, they're the ones that care about you, and they will try to help you. Again, you are of their blood, so there's that bond, there's that want, that need for their bloodline to do well, to grow, to succeed, to flourish. Pick whatever word you'd like. Add to that, you're doing the same for them by giving them your light and giving them your prayers. Now, this is all a very reduced and far less nuanced explanation of what actually takes place, but it's nonetheless true. Yes, you can always ask your ancestors for specific things, but what you ask for should not be frivolous things and junk. Ask for things that will benefit you or benefit your family in some tangible way. Now, this can be hard for some people to grasp, but there is a real difference between spiritual work and what we call magic. The lines do overlap more often than not, but the two concepts differ in a number of ways, and this is something that we'll explore in later episodes of this podcast. For now, I just want you to understand that while the spiritual and the magical most certainly complement each other extremely well, they require different approaches, typically garner different types of results, and sometimes the morals or logic of one is at odds with the morals and logic of the other. Of all the magical traditions I've ever practiced for any reasonable amount of time, the majority of them do incorporate some form of ancestral veneration to some degree. So, while there's much more that I could say about how you should approach your dead, how they interact and communicate with you, and even how the mechanisms of the spiritual realm work, I think I've probably given you enough to sit with and think about so far. And yes, over time, we will definitely dive a bit deeper into all the more technical aspects here. But the goal of this episode is simply to introduce you to the concept at a very basic level to help you at least kind of get your footing and get started. So let's quickly recap what we've gone over so far, okay? Everyone has spirits that walk with them. Some of those spirits are good, some of those spirits are bad. Everyone can learn to communicate with their spirits, and it just takes belief and repetition. That communication with your spirits is strengthened through a reciprocal relationship. Your ancestors are your first line of spiritual defense and technically spiritual access. And lastly, spirit work and mediumship are not exactly magic. They do complement magical work well, though. So now that we have some of the more important understandings out of the way, let's start talking about how you can actually get started with connecting with the spirits of your ancestors. Another one of the more impactful things that you can do for your spiritual practice is simply getting to know your roots, trying to understand who and where you come from. You see, no one in my family on either side had ever truly worked at putting together our family tree. So about 12 or 13 years ago, I decided I was going to do just that. For many years, this is something I would work on late at night when I had a little bit of quiet time to myself. I would comb through anything I could find on the Ancestry website. I would rummage through newspaper archives. I would lurk on various forums, and I would even ask older family members for stories and pictures. Eventually, I decided that it would be a good idea to take a DNA test through Ancestry.com just to kind of further confirm what I was finding with all of my research. So anyway, I ended up meeting a few long-lost family members scattered all across the globe. I even found one of my aunts in Canada about 8 years ago, and I still keep in contact with her to this day. She's on my dad's side, and my dad never really introduced me to his father's family. So by making a connection with her over these years, I've actually learned a lot about that side of myself, about that side of my family. She's been able to send me pictures and all kinds of stories. It's been an amazing and eye-opening experience, to be quite honest with you. And that's just one person from one side of my family. I've been at this, like I said, for 12 or 13 years. The wealth of information that I have now is rather large. So through all of my genealogy research, I can now say that I do know the people I come from, and I do know where all we've been. And just as importantly, I learned a lot about myself in that process too. Knowing where you come from is definitely something that I think everyone, regardless of spiritual inclinations, needs to discover at some point in their life. But for spiritual workers, having a deep knowledge about your ancestors can greatly help you determine several things that you can or maybe even should be doing in your ancestral work, and honestly, in your spiritual work in general. So, for instance, maybe you have some ancestors that were alcoholics when they were alive. So, approaching them at an ancestral table, it might be a good idea to avoid offering them any sort of liquor. Maybe they like their coffee a certain way. So, when you bring them a cup of coffee, you know how to make it to best get them to respond to it favorably. Maybe you discover that one of your ancestors was a musician or a priest, or maybe they were even involved in some sort of magical practices as well. So working with these elements from parts of their lives when you go to speak with them only helps to strengthen that rapport and reciprocity that you're trying to build with them. Knowing this sort of information about your ancestors actually goes a very long way in helping you tailor an approach that can keep them all happy and active. Now, if you notice, I've mentioned that by knowing your ancestors, it allows you to better know yourself. Now, what I mean by this is that by learning about their trials and tribulations and their successes and failures, it provides you with a sort of roadmap that you can follow or improve upon in your own life. By mirroring some of their experiences in this way, not only can you grow as a person, but you're also honoring their legacy and trying to build upon those things. Now, I'm of course not telling you that if you had an ancestor who owned a cobbler shop, for instance, that now you should run out and open your own shoe repair business, okay? But if that ancestor was successful at their business, maybe that's who you should reach out to for help in launching your own business, even if you've never had the inclination to do so. In fact, it might just be something that's in your blood, so to speak. You might surprise yourself. And in that ancestor's eyes, they're always going to want to see you do well. So perhaps they intercede in various ways to continue to give you a little nudge in the right direction. If it helps, you can look at it a bit like this. Have you ever met someone who comes from a long line of doctors, lawyers, or other well-to-do folks? Going back several generations, they all did this one type of work, and they were all wildly successful at it. Sure, some of it may have been nepotism, but we also can't discount the possibility that their family, for whatever reason, are just built right for that line of work. So whether through their family providing them a helping hand, or through simply them being wired to do really well at a specific line of work, they continue a sort of lineage. Now, the same can apply on the opposite side of the spectrum as well. Maybe that family has a long lineage of drug abuse, alcoholism, and violence. Again, some of it may simply be that they've been taught these things in various ways through their family, but part of it may also just be because their brains are wired to do those things, and that wiring gets passed down to the next generation, and so forth. Knowing the history of your family in this same way can radically inform not only how you approach your dead, but also what you may be well suited to do in your own life and what potential pitfalls you may be more inclined to fall into. My godmother has a saying that she's reminded me of on more than a few occasions, and I want you to remember it now and speak it or think it whenever you find the need for it, because eventually you will. The saying is this: you cannot know where you are going if you do not know where you've already been. This saying has come in handy many times for me, and it simply means that if you look at your ancestors, you can learn a whole lot about yourself simply by observing some of the similarities between yourself and them. During your digging, you're probably going to find a lot of these similarities. Take note of all of these, as they may be important later. Additionally, as I've discussed, spirits who did really well in life can help you move in that same direction and behave in certain ways. But there are also spirits around you who can equally influence you to do wrong and move in a negative direction and also behave in a negative way. Let me pause here to just let you know now that I am not in any way advocating for you to blame all of your problems and successes on spirits. That would be profoundly foolish. You are not them, and they are not you. Yes, they can have pretty profound or devastating effects on you and your life if you aren't careful, but about 90% of the time, it is not spirits who forced you to make any kind of decision. It would be equally as foolish to dismiss our own responsibility over our own lives. If we did that, then all of this talk of spiritual work and magic to improve our lives is totally pointless. Both magic and spirits need a conduit through which to work and yield tangible results in the physical world. Remember, everything here requires a working relationship. Having said all of this, I highly recommend that you start researching your family history as deeply as you can, as this alone will give you a massive advantage when it comes time to start reaching out to your ancestors. In fact, it's the one step that far too many people simply don't do. As a bonus, that research may also be extremely useful in finding pictures of your ancestors for your ancestral table. And don't just stick to genealogy websites and archives. Get out there and talk to the elders in your family. Get out there and talk to community members who may have known some of your ancestors when they were alive. They're often like segments of an encyclopedia of your family. They hold many stories that you've probably never heard and names that were likely long gone before you were ever born. Keep in mind that these recommendations are intended to simply give you a framework that you can use to get moving in the right direction. I can preach all day long about how I've gone about it and the preferable ways to go about it and what's efficacious versus non-efficacious. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's still up to you to hold yourself accountable for actually doing any further research, which again, I do highly recommend that you do as you begin to explore ancestral veneration, because with or without that knowledge, your mileage may vary. So lastly, for those of you who were adopted or who don't have a connection to your blood relatives for whatever reason, all of this is indeed a little bit trickier, and it's a topic of discussion all on its own. So I'll be discussing that more at length in a future blog post that I plan to write and publish on my website, BayouRootHouse.com. I don't want to leave y'all hanging, but it's a subject that I'll need to actually sit down with and do a deep dive into, as it can get a little bit complex. So I don't mean to leave you out of the discussion, quite the opposite. I just want to be able to be thorough in discussing that angle of this conversation. I promise I won't leave you hanging for too long. For now, if you follow along with the rest of this episode, I recommend approaching everything here as, quote, all my good and helpful ancestors, known and unknown, who walk with me and guide me with light and positivity. So now that you have a pretty good understanding of some of the more core mechanisms of this practice, it's time to put all of that knowledge together and build your ancestral altar. Now, before I just start giving you instructions on how to do this, I want to remind you again that you can do just as much with only prayer, light, and water as you can with an entire shrine room filled up with all of the dolls, tables, and spiritual tools that you can imagine. So these instructions are a great starting point, but what you may find is that you and your spirits prefer to have a more elaborate setup, or maybe even something more minimal. Everyone has their own way of doing this, but these instructions are indeed a great middle ground from which you can easily expand or decrease. First, you'll need to find a space that you can set aside just for praying for and speaking with your spirits. It's best if you're able to create a permanent spot in your home for this, but something temporary is fine as well. This area will eventually gather and build spiritual energy in and around it the more time you spend in it tending to your spirits. So when choosing the best place for this table, there's some things you need to keep in mind. It should not be placed in your bedroom if you sleep or are intimate with your partner in there. For starters, spiritual energy, especially the amount that you're going to be building up in this space, can absolutely result in your sleep being disturbed. You see, spirits may come to you in dreams, just in general every so often, but when you sleep in a room that houses spirits, it's a whole different ballgame entirely. You really don't want a near constant stream of spirits trying to communicate with you as you're trying to go to sleep. So, insomnia can occur, which then can lead to a number of other spiritual, physical, or emotional issues as you become weakened by fatigue. You become much more susceptible to spiritual energy as you begin practicing these ways, and that susceptibility, it only increases in a not so great way when you're drained and unfocused. If you do sleep, you may find yourself having some extremely bizarre dreams and or nightmares. Secondly, I don't really think I need to expand on the issue about intimacy in front of the spirits of your deceased grandparents. I think you get the idea. It's just disrespectful. My advice is to just avoid it altogether by not placing your ancestral altar in a room where you sleep or have sex. Pretty simple. It should also not be placed in a high traffic area of your home. This is a space for you and your spirits. It is not a playroom, and it is not a place for your friends to hang out. This space is meant to be set apart from the rest of the world. It's a sacred space where you'll be coming to communicate with the spirits of your ancestors. It's personal, and it's solely for you and for them. You don't want to dirty the energy up there through heavy foot traffic by other people who may not respect it the same way that you do, or who may not always keep up with their own spiritual hygiene. Likewise, this area should be free of any horseplay, arguments, drug use, etc. You get the point. Treat it like a small church if it helps to see it that way. To start getting this area set up, you'll first need some sort of flat surface. Now, this could be a table or the top of a shelf, but it just needs to be something that's large enough to hold a glass of water, a vase of flowers, a candle, and maybe some pictures of your ancestors. This does not have to be elaborate, and in the beginning, I would even argue that you should keep it really simple. Now, once you've chosen your surface, you'll need to clean and cleanse it really well. You'll start by physically cleaning it first. Get all of the dust off of it and give it a good wipe down with whatever cleaning solution you prefer. When you've got it physically cleaned off, you'll take you a new clean white cloth and pour some Florida water all over that cloth. Now begin to wipe down the table just as you did before, making sure to hit every little nook and cranny. Normally, when I cleanse working spaces off, I tend to include some holy water on the cloth as well, but Florida water or another cleansing spiritual cologne by itself is just fine. As you're cleansing the table, you want to pray to God and pray to your ancestors. Simply speak from the heart. Tell them what you're doing, tell them why. Ask them for help and blessings to prepare the table properly. You can also visualize in your mind's eye negative or stagnant energy on the table as a dirty or like toned down color. As you swipe it with the cloth, visualize in your mind's eye most of that heavy energy being removed to reveal a much brighter and cleaner table underneath it. Now, you're going to take you a rattle. You just shake that rattle above, below, and on all sides of the table for a minute. The reason for this is that wiping it down with Florida water may not have removed all the gunk. There may be small particles, for lack of a better word, hanging onto the table. The sound of the rattle shaking causes vibrations in the air around the table. Vibration moves energy, big and small. You get the point. At this point, you've removed the majority of heavy energy by wiping down the table. And you've gotten the remaining bits kicked up off of the table and into the air by using your rattle. So while those remaining energetic particles are floating around, unable to be just wiped away, you'll now use some form of smoke to cleanse the air around the table, completely neutralizing everything. And you can do this in any way in which you're familiar, but I prefer using a stick of Palo Santo for this. Now you've got your table placed, cleaned, and cleansed. So what's next? Well, if you have a clean white tablecloth that you can place on the table, go ahead and do that now. If not, no worries. It's not some sort of mandatory thing. But the color white signifies divinity, light, cleanliness, purity, etc. All of the qualities that we're hoping to attract more of into this space. In Espiritismo, we cover our bóvedas and mesas with a white cloth, so this is likely a little bit of overlap coming from my practice as an Espiritista. It's not absolutely needed for this specific table that I'm teaching you how to put together, but it is still beneficial to do if you can. Now, if you have pictures of your ancestors, you'll place them on either or both sides of the table nearest the back, and you'll leave a space in the center of these pictures. If you don't have pictures of your ancestors that you'd like to use, you can also simply write down as many of their names as you know on a small slip of paper, and you can keep that paper on your ancestral altar wherever you'd like. Of course, while I recommend doing one of these two things, or even both, it is totally up to you. Not everyone does this. After all, this is a space that you and your ancestral spirits are building together, and as such, even the process should be personal. Now take you a brand new white candle. I typically use a glass encased novena candle for this, but you can use whatever sort of candle you prefer or feel called to use. It just needs to be white. What you'll do is you'll take that candle and flip it upside down so that the base of the candle is now where the head of the candle usually is, and the head of the candle is now where the base of the candle usually is. You'll hold it upside down like this under the faucet in your kitchen sink. You'll turn on the cold water, and you'll let the cold water run down the candle as you turn the candle counterclockwise with one hand and swipe the water down the candle with the other hand. You'll do this until you've hit every inch of the candle. Lastly, you just take this candle and you're going to put it toward the back and center of the table, right where you left that gap between the pictures. Now you'll just get you a brand new wine glass or something similar. It shouldn't have any kind of designs or colors on it, just an old plain clear glass. You wash this glass by hand inside and out using regular soap and water to get it physically clean first. After that, you'll just rub it down with some Florida water, also inside and out, and then with a dry white cloth, you wipe the glass completely dry. Lastly, you'll light a cigar, and you place the lid end of the cigar into your mouth and place the other end of the cigar near the rim of the glass and blow smoke through the cigar and into the glass. All that's left to do now is to fill the glass with cool water from your tap. I recommend using tap water for this as it comes directly from the pipes that run underground, i.e. nearest the dead. Please don't use bottled water for this unless there is absolutely no other option available, as it isn't just the fact that the water from your tap makes its way through those underground pipes, but bottled water also has generally been treated so much that the majority of the natural minerals have been stripped away. Those minerals are helpful in conducting energy through the water. If you must use bottled water, spring water would be probably the best option for these purposes. Now, all of these items on this table serve both earthly and spiritual needs. The candle gives light to your spirits spiritually, as well as physically at your table. The water conducts electricity or energy, acts as a filter of sorts, and can even be read as a divinatory system to receive more physically rooted messages from your spirits in the form of things like bubbles and cloudiness. The pictures or names on the table act as a point of focus for you, but they also call directly to individual ancestors through representation. Everything you place on this table needs to serve a purpose. This is not a place to sit your phone while it charges. It isn't a place to toss food wrappers and other trash, and it's not where you put your car keys and wallet when you come home for the day. This is not an end table in your living room. This is the place that you come to speak with the spirits of your ancestors, and it should be treated as sacred in all situations. So now you should have an ancestral altar completely cleaned, cleansed, set up, and ready for you to sit and speak with your ancestors. You should establish somewhat of a schedule to follow. Your ancestral table is, after all, not just a piece of decor for your home. It's a sort of axis mundi, a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. It's sacred and it's alive, and it will become even more so over time as you sit and work it regularly. This is the space that you have set aside from the rest of the mundane world, a space that has been made welcoming to the spirits of your dead. This is not at all something you should simply set and forget. Remember our overall theme here. This is a reciprocal relationship that you're attempting to build. My suggestion is to just start slowly. So pick one day out of the week to sit at your ancestral altar. Ideally, you want to come to this table on the same day and preferably the same time each week. Consistency is key here because once you begin sitting at this table on a designated day and time every week, your spirits will begin to do the same since they know that you'll be there the same time every week to speak with them. It's okay if you can't make it at that exact time every week. The world isn't going to explode and your ancestors are not going to curse you for it. Just try to adhere to it as much as you can. At that time every week when you sit at the table, you simply begin by lighting your candle and then reciting some opening prayers. If you prefer formal prayers, you can recite the Lord's Prayer, followed by the Hail Mary, and ending with the Glory Be. I'm recommending these as this is a fairly common set of prayers that we use in Espiritismo for opening a misa or even when we sit at our personal bóvedas. However, this is not a hard and fast rule that everyone does. So if the more formal type of prayers don't resonate with you, you can absolutely speak a prayer from the heart. You can speak your opening prayers aloud, you can whisper them, or you can recite them in your head if need be. Your opening prayers should be ones that are offered to your ancestors, asking for them to be elevated, protected, and allowed to communicate with you. It's also a good idea to include something in those opening prayers to ask that God allow all of the good and helpful ancestral spirits to come through, while the heavier or more negative spirits be denied entry to this space. Now for the exciting part. Are you ready for it? You sit down and listen. The first few times that you sit at your ancestral table, quietly, waiting to hear or feel something, you may actually end up spending most of that time just trying to get your brain to settle down enough for you to even organize your own thoughts, let alone messages coming to you from the world of spirits. This is extremely common, and it will get a bit easier over time, so long as you're consistent with the practice. And even all these years later, I still deal with this problem from time to time as well. Most of the developed world struggles with focus and the quieting of the mind. But again, the more consistent you are, the less noisy your head will be. Honestly, if you want to start getting your head a little clearer and more organized outside of this practice, I also recommend that you find time to meditate a few times every week. It doesn't need to be anything intense, just maybe 15 minutes or so a few times throughout the week, just to give your brain a rest from all the stimulation of your daily life. A chance for you to process all those random and hectic thoughts and then let them go for good. This alone can actually have a pretty profound impact on your spiritual and magical work. But I digress. When you sit at your table, the primary goal is communication with and service to the spirits of your ancestors. While you're sitting there, simply offer them prayers for their elevation. Tell them about things going on in your life, both good and bad. Ask them if they need anything. Ask them if they have anything that they'd like to communicate to you. Offer them things they enjoy from time to time. You should treat your time at your ancestral table as if your ancestors are sitting right there, directly across from you, and you're simply having a conversation or a quick check-in with them, because that's exactly what is happening in this moment. As you're sitting there, pay attention to your thoughts, physical sensations, smells that seem to come from out of nowhere. All of these and more can be signs that your spirits are trying to communicate and interact with you. As you do this over time, you'll eventually begin to develop clearer communication with your ancestors. The persistence, the light, the water, the prayers, all of this is like sustenance and a huge beacon of light to the spirits. And that beacon just gets brighter and brighter if you maintain your practice properly. The more time you spend interacting with, or thinking about, or discussing the spiritual realm, the more attuned and in tune you become with it. It becomes almost second nature at some point. And while not every little bump in the night or string of bad luck is some evil spirit, keep in mind that there are indeed heavy or earthbound or even downright negative spirits that do exist. So when you begin observing this practice of communicating with spirits of the dead and start to light yourself up like a beacon over time, it's not just the good spirits who see that and take it as an invitation. This makes it all the more important for you to develop a really strong relationship with your ancestral spirits because, as I mentioned earlier, they're your first line of spiritual defense. So that's all to say that if you set up this table, you need to maintain it, not just build it and leave it in a dark corner of your house where all it does is collect dust. If you do that, you're just leaving a door open for whatever to walk on through with zero resistance. Let's circle back for a minute to when you should visit your table. So visiting your ancestral table once a week is a sort of bare minimum type of schedule. It's for the more formal sit down, if you will. Before you leave your house every day, maybe swing by their table to ask them to watch over you as you leave. Or just offer them a, "Hey y'all, good morning." You could even do the same thing at night before you go to bed. It's also good if you can share a small portion of a family dinner once or twice a month with them. If you do this, it doesn't need to be a large plate of food, but it should be unsalted if possible, and they should get their portion of that meal before anyone else makes a plate. Are you having a cup of coffee? Great, you can make them one too, and then sit at the table and enjoy it with them. And the list goes on, but I'm sure you get the gist. Please don't limit yourself to interacting with and communicating with your ancestors once per week. Again, that's for more of a formal sit down, right? Your ancestors walk with you every single minute of every single day, and they are always accessible to you. In fact, it doesn't have to stop at the table. Simply thinking about your ancestors throughout the day also goes a really long way in helping build this relationship. Your dead simply want to be remembered and honored. So the more that you turn your mind to your spirits and spiritual matters, the more you attract them to you. But I think for now, that's probably enough information to at least get you started off on the right foot. By tapping into the power of your ancestral spirits and attempting to slowly build a strong and working relationship with them, you may find that that alone makes your life feel way more balanced. However, there is indeed a ton of different directions that you can go with all of this and ways to incorporate their power into your magical work. But I think that that'll have to be a topic that we dive deeper into in a future episode. For now, focus on getting your ancestral table established and start simply connecting with your spirits. Pay attention to your emotions, pay attention to your thoughts, physical sensations, and most importantly, pay attention to your dreams. Keep your spirits happy and honored, and they'll guide you from there. And with that, I just want to thank you so much for joining me for this first episode of the Bayou Root House podcast. And I hope that you're as excited as I am for the journey ahead. I have a lot of ideas and topics that I want to go over in future episodes, and I hope that you'll join me for those as well. I do truly hope that the information that I share in this podcast benefits your spiritual or magical practices in some way. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please follow along with me here or over at my website, BayouRootHouse.com. If you're more visually inclined, I also post images of my magical and spiritual work over on Instagram, where you can find me as Bayou_Root_House. So until next time, just remember, the veil is thin and magic is all around us.